They say marriage is a graveyard for secrets, but I found the shovel at Terminal 4. My husband adjusted his silk tie and smiled at the woman who sacrificed everything for him. "Just sit here," he lied. "We will be back right after check-in." He thought I would leave her there. He forgot that I still had a conscience, and that the documents in her handbag would burn his counterfeit empire to the ground. My name is Sylvia Fairbanks. There was a time, before the charity galas and the suffocating velvet of high society, when I was an architect, I used to look at steel beams and concrete foundations and see the bones of a future. Now, at 34 years old, I stood in the middle of the bustling departures hall at O'Hare International Airport, realizing with a sickening lurch that I had become nothing more than a structural ornament in my husband's carefully curated life. The air in the terminal was recycled and stale, masking the scent of expensive perfume and anxiety that clung to the travelers around us. Garrett stood beside me, radiating the kind of polished, aggressive confidence that had recently landed him on the cover of business magazines as the visionary CEO of Apex Horizon. He was a beautiful man, in the way a marble statue is beautiful, cold, hard, and chiseled to perfection. He checked his platinum watch for the third time in a minute. A tight smile plastered across his face that did not reach his eyes. It was his camera-ready smile, the one he wore when he was about to acquire a competitor or fire 1,000 employees. To the outside world, this trip was a heartwarming gesture. Garrett had spent weeks curating the narrative on social media, a healing journey to a renowned wellness clinic in the Swiss Alps for his ailing mother. He had captioned photos with words like devotion and legacy. But the reality sat slumped in a wheelchair between us. Beatrice was 72 years old. The woman who had built the foundation of the family wealth with her bare hands now looked like a bird trapped in a cage of bones. Her silver hair was thinning, and her hands, once steady enough to sign multi-million-dollar contracts, trembled as she clutched the armrests of the chair. There were days when the fog of dementia seemed to roll in, obscuring her sharp wit, but her eyes, those piercing, intelligent gray eyes, remained lucid. They were the only things about her that refused to age. I felt a cold prickle of unease crawl up my spine as the porter loaded our luggage onto the cart. I counted the pieces: 2 large vintage leather trunks for Garrett, my own matched set. That was it. "Garrett," I whispered, stepping closer to him so the porter wouldn't hear. "Where is Beatrice's luggage? Did the driver leave it in the car?" Garrett didn't even look at me. He was busy typing a furious message on his phone, his thumbs moving with lethal precision. "I had it shipped ahead. Sylvia, honestly, do you think I would make her deal with baggage claim in her condition? It is already waiting for us in Zurich." His voice was smooth, like expensive scotch, but the logic tasted wrong. We were flying first class. Handling luggage was hardly an inconvenience. I looked at Beatrice. She was staring at the departure board, the numbers flipping over to reveal destinations she might never see. She looked small, too small. "Come on," Garrett said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gripped the handles of the wheelchair. "We are running behind schedule." He didn't head toward the first-class check-in counters where the red carpet awaited us. Instead, he steered Beatrice toward the far end of the terminal, past the busy cafes and the newsstands, toward a quiet alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a dead zone in the airport architecture, a space designed for nothing, where the foot traffic thinned out and the noise of the crowd faded into a distant hum. "Why are we coming over here?" I asked, my heels clicking sharply against the terrazzo floor. The sound echoed, lonely and hollow. "The lines are too long," Garrett lied. The first-class line was empty. I could see it from here. "I want Mother to be comfortable while I sort out a discrepancy with the seating assignments. It is too chaotic over there." He stopped the wheelchair facing the window, where the gray Chicago sky pressed against the glass. The tarmac outside was a choreographed dance of planes and fuel trucks, but here, in this corner, it felt like we had stepped out of time. Garrett walked around to the front of the wheelchair and crouched down. The fabric of his $5,000 suit stretched taut across his shoulders. He took his mother's frail, paper-thin hands in his own. It was a picture of filial piety, perfect for a photo op, but there were no cameras here. "Mother," Garrett said, his voice dropping an octave, projecting a warmth that made my skin crawl. "I need you to just sit here for a moment. Sylvia and I have to go to the counter to handle the check-in process. The agents are being difficult about the wheelchair assistance, and I do not want you to have to sit in that line." Beatrice looked at him. Her gaze drifted from his face to his tie, then to me. She blinked slowly. "Garrett?" she murmured, her voice raspy. "Are we flying now?" "Soon, Mother, very soon," he said. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a boarding pass sleeve. He tucked it firmly into her trembling hands. "Here is your ticket. Hold on to this tight. Do not drop it." I frowned. I hadn't seen him print the boarding passes. I stepped forward, trying to catch a glimpse of the document, but Garrett stood up abruptly, blocking my view. He turned to me, and the mask slipped for a fraction of a second. His eyes were devoid of light. "Let's go, Sylvia," he said. "But we can't just leave her here alone," I protested, my voice rising. "She might get confused. She needs water. Let me stay with her while you—" "She is fine," Garrett snapped, his voice a low hiss. "She has a view. She is safe. Stop making a scene." He reached out and grabbed my hand. It wasn't a romantic gesture. His fingers clamped around my palm and knuckles with crushing force, grinding the bones together. It was a warning, a physical command to silence me. I gasped, the pain sharp and immediate, shooting up my wrist. "Garrett, you're hurting me," I whispered, trying to pull away, but his grip only tightened. He began to walk, dragging me with him, away from the windows, away from the alcove, moving with a purposeful stride toward the VIP security checkpoint. "Smile, Sylvia," he muttered through gritted teeth, nodding at a passing businessman who recognized him. "Walk," I stumbled, struggling to match his pace in my heels. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that warned me something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. This wasn't just rude, it was predatory. The way he had positioned her, facing away from the concourse so she couldn't see us leave, the way he had isolated her, 10 yards away, 20 yards away, I couldn't help it. I twisted my neck, fighting the momentum of his pull, to look back one last time. Beatrice was still there, a small, dark silhouette against the vast, gray light of the window. She hadn't moved. She was looking down at the ticket in her lap, her fingers fumbling to adjust her silk scarf, smoothing the wrinkles with a heartbreaking patience. She looked so still, so incredibly patient. She was waiting for her son. She trusted him. She believed that in 5 or 10 minutes, we would come walking back with smiles and bottles of water, ready to whisk her away to the Swiss Alps. She didn't know she was sitting in a graveyard, and as Garrett yanked me around the corner, cutting off my line of sight, I realized with a terrifying clarity that I was the one holding the shovel. The red velvet rope of the first-class priority lane felt less like a divider and more like a noose tightening around my neck. We were moving forward, deeper into the sanctuary of wealth and privilege, but my feet felt heavy, as if I were wading through wet cement. Garrett was still gripping my hand. His fingers laced through mine in a parody of intimacy, but the pressure was cutting off my circulation. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the polite murmur of the other travelers. "Garrett," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I tried to keep the tremor out of it. "You forgot to give her the boarding pass, the one in her hand. It looked like a printed itinerary, not a boarding pass. How is she going to get through security?" Garrett did not break his stride. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the TSA agent ahead, flashing that charming golden boy smile that had disarmed shareholders and mistresses alike. "She does not need a boarding pass, Sylvia," he murmured. His lips barely moved. The sound was low, flat, and terrifyingly calm. "She is not coming with us." I stopped, My heels dug into the plush carpet. The momentum of his walk jerked my arm, nearly dislocating my shoulder. But I planted my feet. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The fluorescent lights overhead flared too bright, searing my retinas. "What?" I breathed. "What are you talking about? The clinic in Zurich? The doctors? The reservation?" Garrett sighed, a sound of supreme irritation, as if I were a child who had failed to understand a simple math problem. He leaned in close, bringing his face next to mine. Anyone watching would think he was whispering a romantic nothing into my ear. "There is no clinic," he said. The coldness in his tone froze the blood in my veins. "A van from Shadow Shade Nursing Home will be circling the arrivals curb in 30 minutes. I paid the driver $500 cash to collect a confused elderly woman claiming to be waiting for her son. They will take it from there." Shadow Shade. The name hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I gasped. The air sucked out of my lungs. Shadow Shade was not a facility. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was a state-run nightmare on the south side of the city, a place notorious for health code violations, bed sores, and the stench of urine masking the smell of decay. It was the very place Garrett had publicly railed against in his interviews about elder care reform just 6 months ago. "You cannot be serious," I stammered, horror rising in my throat like bile. "That place is a hellhole. She will die there. Garrett, she will last a week. She is 72. Sylvia, she has lived long enough to become a liability," he hissed, his grip tightening until I thought my metacarpals would snap. "Listen to me closely. The moment we wheels up, I will call the police and report her missing. By the time they find her at that facility, she will be just another Jane Doe in the system, a senile old woman ranting about a son who is currently on a transatlantic flight. Do you know what happens to her trust fund if she is declared incompetent and becomes a ward of the state without a designated guardian present? I trigger the emergency clause. I get power of attorney over the remaining assets. All of it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. No, not a stranger. A monster wearing a bespoke suit. He was talking about his mother, the woman who had sold her jewelry to fund his first startup, the woman who had taught him to tie his shoes, as if she were a depreciating asset to be liquidated. "This is evil," I whispered. "Garrett, this is murder." He yanked me forward, forcing me to stumble toward the document checker. "This is business," he snapped. "And you are going to keep your mouth shut. Walk, smile, hand him your passport." "No," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "I am going back to get her." Garrett stopped. He turned his body to shield us from the view of the security agents. His eyes narrowed into slits. "If you turn around now, Sylvia, you are done. Do you understand me? You walk away from me, and you walk away from the penthouse. You walk away from the black card in your purse. You walk away from the galas, the respect, the name. I will ruin you. I will make sure you are sleeping in a gutter within a month. You think you are an architect? You haven't drawn a blueprint in 5 years. You are nothing without me." His words were meant to be chains, binding me to him with the weight of fear and comfort. He was right. I had become soft. I had become dependent. I lived in a gilded cage that he had built, and I had forgotten how to fly. But then, a memory flashed in my mind, unbidden and sharp. 3 years ago, the night I found the lipstick on his collar. He had screamed at me, called me paranoid, raised his hand as if to strike me. Beatrice had wheeled herself into the room, her frail body trembling with rage. She had rammed her wheelchair between us, shielding me with her own vulnerable form. "Touch her," she had warned him, her voice shaking but fierce. "And I will write you out of the will before the sun rises." She had protected me. When my own courage had failed, she had lent me hers. And now, she was sitting alone on a hard plastic chair, clutching a fake ticket, waiting for a son who was erasing her from existence. Ding-dong. The airport announcement chime echoed through the terminal. "Passenger Fairbanks, please report to Gate K-12." The sound was final, It sounded like a gavel hitting a block of wood. It sounded like Judgment Day. I looked to my left. There was a glass partition separating the priority lane from the main concourse. I saw my reflection. I saw a woman in a $3,000 cashmere coat, with perfectly coiffed hair and flawless makeup. She looked expensive. She looked hollow. She looked like a doll that could be posed and manipulated. A pretty thing with nothing inside. I hated her. I hated that reflection more than I had ever hated anything in my life. My heart hammered against my ribs. Thump, 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 a frantic bird trying to break free. The panic that had been rising in my chest suddenly clarified into a cold, hard resolve. I could not breathe in this air anymore. It was too thin. It was poisoned. Garrett was holding out his hand for my passport, expecting obedience. He expected the doll to perform. "Give me the passport. Sylvia," he commanded, his patience wearing thin. I looked at his hand. Smooth, manicured, the hand of a man who strangled things without ever leaving a bruise. Something inside me snapped. It was audible in my own head. Like a dry twig breaking under a boot, I yanked my hand away from his. The motion was violent, shocking us both. I stepped back, putting 2 feet of distance between us. "No," I said. My voice was loud. People turned to look. Garrett froze. His eyes went wide with disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You go," I said, the words tumbling out, raw and unrehearsed. "You get on that plane. You go to hell for all I care. But I am not you." "Sylvia," he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Stepping toward me, "Do not make a scene. Get back here. Don't touch me," I screamed. The sound tore through the polite silence of the VIP lane. The security guards looked up. The businessmen stopped checking their phones. Garrett flinched, looking around nervously at the unwanted attention. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I turned around. I didn't walk. I ran. "Sylvia!" Garrett shouted behind me. "Sylvia, you come back here right now. You are making a mistake." I didn't answer. I didn't look back at the red carpet or the life of ease I was leaving behind. I kicked off my high heels so I could run faster, leaving the expensive designer shoes lying in the middle of the walkway like discarded shackles. I ran against the flow of the crowd, dodging confused travelers, my stocking feet slipping on the polished floor. I ran toward the main terminal. I ran toward the woman who was waiting for me. I ran to save my soul. My lungs burned with every ragged breath as I sprinted back toward the alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The airport terminal, which had felt like a runway for the elite just minutes ago, now blurred into a chaotic obstacle course of rushing bodies and rolling suitcases. I collided with a businessman, muttering a breathless apology without stopping, my stocking feet sliding dangerously on the polished terrazzo. Panic clawed at my throat. What if I was too late? What if the van from the nursing home had already come? What if Garrett had lied about the time? Just as he had lied about everything else. I rounded the corner, my hand gripping the cold metal of a support pillar to stop my momentum. She was still there. The relief that washed over me was so intense it nearly buckled my knees. Beatrice sat exactly where Garrett had parked her, a small, solitary figure against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the gray tarmac. She was clutching the piece of paper, the fake itinerary, with both hands, holding it to her chest like a sacred text. Her head was turned slightly to the left, her eyes scanning the passing faces with a hopeful, anxious intensity. She was looking for the handsome son who had promised to return. I slowed my pace, forcing myself to walk the last few yards so I would not frighten her. My heart broke all over again as I watched her straighten her posture when she saw a man in a suit approach, only to slump slightly when he walked past without a glance. "Beatrice!" I called out, my voice cracking. Her head snapped toward me. A bright, genuine smile illuminated her wrinkled face, making her look decades younger. "Sylvia! There you are!" She looked behind me, her eyes darting around my waist level, then back up. "Where is Garrett? Did he stop to get coffee?" I told him I did not need anything, but you know how he is, always fussing. I collapsed to my knees beside her wheelchair, disregarding the dirt on the floor or the inquisitive stares of strangers. I took her cold, trembling hands in mine. I could not look her in the eye. I could not tell her that her son was currently settling into a first-class pod, drinking champagne and celebrating her erasure. The truth was a blade I could not bring myself to wield. Not yet. "He is not coming, Mother," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I fought to keep my voice steady. "The flight, it has been cancelled. There was a technical issue with the plane. We have to go." Beatrice blinked, confusion clouding her gray eyes. "Cancelled? But Garrett said everything was arranged. He was so sure. Is he rebooking the tickets? Should we wait for him here?" "No," I said, shaking my head violently. I squeezed her hands. "He is dealing with the airline. He told me to take you home. It is going to be a mess here. Too much chaos. We need to leave. Now." Before she could ask more questions, my pocket began to vibrate. It was a violent, continuous buzz against my hip, like an angry insect. I pulled out my phone. "Garrett." 3 messages flashed on the screen in rapid succession. "I saw you run. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Walk out those doors with her, and you are dead to me. Do not think I am joking. I have contacted the bank. Try buying a stick of gum. I dare you." My hands shook as I unlocked my banking app. Face ID recognized me, but the numbers on the screen were horrifyingly final. Account locked. Contact administrator. I switched to my credit card app. Card status, deactivated, lost/stolen. He was fast. He was terrifyingly efficient. In the 5 minutes since I had fled the security line, Garrett had severed my financial arteries. I checked my physical wallet. I had 3 $20 bills and a 10 tucked into a side pocket. $70. That was all I had to my name. $70 to fight a billionaire. "Sylvia?" Beatrice's voice was small, laced with a sudden, sharp worry. "You look pale. Dear, is everything all right?" I shoved the phone deep into my coat pocket. "I am fine," I said, standing up and unlocking the brakes on her wheelchair. "Just frustrated with the airline. Let's go." We moved through the terminal, but this time, the journey felt like a retreat. I pushed her past the duty-free shops filled with luxury goods I could no longer buy, past the restaurants where a single meal cost more than the cash in my pocket. We exited through the automatic doors into the biting Chicago wind. I ignored the line for the luxury car services and the rideshare app pickup zone. I could not use the apps. My cards were dead. Instead, I pushed Beatrice toward the far end of the curb where the traditional taxis waited. I waved down an old, battered sedan that looked like it had survived a war. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, popped the trunk without getting out. I lifted the wheelchair into the back myself, my muscles straining, grateful that we had no luggage to manage. "Where to?" The driver grunted as I slid into the back seat next to Beatrice. I opened my mouth to say our address, the penthouse on the Gold Coast, and then clamped it shut. Garrett would have changed the digital locks by now. The doorman would have been instructed to turn us away. Going there would only be a humiliation. "Just drive," I said, my voice hollow. "Head toward the suburbs. I will tell you where to stop." The taxi smelled of stale cigarette smoke and pine air freshener, a stark contrast to the leather-scented limousine that had brought us here. The suspension groaned over every pothole. Beatrice sat silently beside me, her hands folded in her lap. She was looking out the window as the airport receded behind us, watching the skyline of the city she had helped build shrink into the distance. She was not senile. She was fragile, yes, but her instincts were honed by decades in the shark tank of high finance. She knew. She had to know. We had no luggage. Her son was missing. We were in a dirty taxi instead of a private car, and I was trembling. I felt a warm, dry hand cover mine. I looked down. Beatrice was gripping my fingers, her strength surprising me. She didn't ask about Garrett again. She didn't ask why we weren't going home. She simply held on, offering comfort when she should have been the one demanding answers. "It is chilly today," she said softly, looking straight ahead. But the heater in here works just fine. Tears blurred my vision. She was choosing to pretend. For my sake, she was accepting the lie to keep me from falling apart. We drove for 40 minutes until the meter read $52. I asked the driver to pull over at a neon sign flickering against the twilight sky. The Starlight Motor Inn. It was a single-story motel on the edge of an industrial park. The kind of place where truckers slept and people went to disappear. I paid the driver, leaving me with $18. "Here?" Beatrice asked, as I helped her into the wheelchair on the cracked pavement. The wind whipped her silver hair across her face. "Just for tonight," I promised, choking back a sob. "I am so sorry. Beatrice, it is just for tonight. It has a roof. Sylvia," she said, lifting her chin with a dignity that made the cheap motel look like a palace. "Lead the way." I pushed her toward the lobby, the wheels of the chair crunching over gravel and cigarette butts. Behind us, the city lights glowed like a distant fire, consuming the life I used to know. We were refugees now, exiled from our own kingdom, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the terrible, unspoken truth hanging between us. The neon sign of the Starlight Motor Inn buzzed outside our window, casting an intermittent, sickly pink glow across the room. It was 2 a.m. The sheets on the bed were thin and smelled of industrial bleach and decades of despair. Beatrice was asleep in the twin bed nearest the door, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. I sat in the fraying armchair in the corner, my knees pulled up to my chest, unable to close my eyes. Every time I blinked, I saw the security gate closing. I saw Garrett's back turning away. In the silence of this wretched room, the ghosts of the past began to bleed into the present. I looked at the sleeping form of my mother-in-law, to the world, and recently even to me. She was just a frail old woman, a relic gathering dust, but as I watched the shadows play across her face, I remembered who she used to be, 30 years ago. Beatrice did not need a wheelchair. She was a force of nature. She was the woman who walked onto construction sites in stilettos and made union bosses tremble. She had founded the company that became Apex Horizon with nothing but a loan and a terrifying amount of grit. She had built skyscrapers. She had reshaped the skyline of Chicago. Garrett had not built the empire. He was merely the prince who had inherited the castle and then proceeded to strip the copper from the walls. I realized now, with a clarity that made me nauseous, how methodically he had dismantled her. It had started 5 years ago. He began attending board meetings in her place, claiming she was tired. Then came the doctors, specialists on his payroll, who prescribed a cocktail of sedatives for her anxiety and early-onset confusion. I remembered the dinner parties where Beatrice would slur her words, spilling wine on the tablecloth, while Garrett looked on with practiced, tragic patience. "It is the dementia," he would whisper to the investors. "It is progressing so fast." It was not dementia. It was chemistry. He had been keeping her in a chemically induced fog, dulling the sharpest mind I had ever known so he could wrestle the steering wheel from her hands. And what about me? I looked at my own hands, unadorned now without my wedding ring. I was just another piece of his carefully constructed facade. Garrett did not marry me for love. He married me because my father was the late Judge Fairbanks, a man whose name was synonymous with integrity and old money in Illinois. Garrett needed a wife with a pedigree to scrub the new money stench off his reputation. He needed a connection to the legal elite. I was not a partner. I was a prop. I was the respectable architect daughter of a judge, the perfect ornament to distract the public while he looted his mother's legacy. A rustle from the bed broke my trance. Beatrice was moving. She sat up, not with the groggy, disoriented struggle I had grown used to over the last few years, but with a sudden, startling sharpness. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. I rushed over. "Mother, do you need water? Lie back down." She raised a hand to stop me. The gesture was firm. She looked up, and the pink neon light caught her eyes. They were not cloudy. They were clear, hard, and terrifyingly focused. He left me, didn't he? She asked. Her voice was not the raspy whisper of an invalid. It was the voice of the CEO she used to be. I froze. The lie I had told at the airport died in my throat. I could not lie to those eyes. Yes, I whispered, shame burning my face. He left us. He thinks you are on your way to a state facility. He thinks I'm on a plane to Zurich. Beatrice nodded slowly. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply absorbed the blow like a boxer taking a hit she had seen coming. I didn't take the pills, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. At the airport, when he handed me his vitamins with the water bottle, I pretended to swallow, but I hid them in my scarf. That is why my head is clearing. That is why I can think. I stared at her, stunned. You knew? You knew he was drugging you? I suspected, she corrected. For a long time, I thought I was truly losing my mind. The days blurred together. I would lose hours, whole afternoons. But there were moments of clarity, moments when I saw him looking at me not with love, but with calculation. So I started playing the part. I let my hand shake more than it needed to. I deliberately forgot names. I let him believe he had won. I thought if I made myself look harmless, weak, and pathetic, he would leave me alone to die in peace in my own home. She gripped the rough blanket, her knuckles white. I underestimated him, she hissed, a flash of pure fury crossing her face. I thought he was just greedy. I did not know he was a monster who would leave his own mother on a sidewalk like a bag of trash. He wants the trust fund, I explained, sitting on the edge of the bed. He plans to declare you missing or incompetent to trigger the emergency clause. He wants more than the trust fund, Beatrice said. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was iron. He is looking for the Blue Heron documents. He has been tearing the house apart for 5 years looking for them. Why do you think he was so eager to renovate my study? Why do you think he fired my old secretary? Blue Heron? I asked. What is that? It is a shell company. Beatrice revealed. 10 years ago, before I stepped down, I found discrepancies in the expansion accounts. Garrett was funneling company money, millions of dollars, into a dummy corporation in the Caymans called Blue Heron. He was not just spending it, he was laundering money for some very dangerous people to artificially inflate our stock prices. I confronted him. He begged. He cried. He promised to pay it back. Like a fool. Like a mother. I covered for him. I thought I could fix him. She let out a bitter laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching. But I kept the proof, she whispered. I have the ledgers. I have the bank transfer records signed in his handwriting. I kept them as insurance. He knows they exist, but he does not know where they are. That is why he hasn't killed me yet. He needed me alive to find them. But today he decided he didn't need the insurance anymore. He decided to cash out. The room fell silent. Save for the hum of the refrigerator, the gravity of what she was saying settled on me. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. This was federal crime. This was prison time. Where are they, Beatrice? I asked. Where are the documents? She looked at me, searching my face for any sign of the woman who had stood passively by for years. She must have seen the change in me, the fire that had ignited at the security checkpoint, because she squeezed my hand. They are safe, she said. But we are not. We are 2 women alone in the dark. Sylvia, we have no money. We have no protection. And my son has the resources of a god. We have something he doesn't, I said, a cold resolve hardening in my chest. I looked at the fragile woman who was actually made of steel. We have the truth, and we have each other. Beatrice smiled then, a wolfish, dangerous smile that I had never seen before. Help me up, she commanded. If we are going to war, I need to stretch my legs. In that dingy motel room, with the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, the dynamic shifted forever. We were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were soldiers in a trench, waiting for dawn to launch our counterattack. The diamond earrings had been a 30th birthday present. A pair of flawless solitaires that Garrett had fastened onto my lobes while whispering about how they matched the ice in his scotch, standing at the counter of a grimy pawn shop on the edge of the city, watching a man with grease under his fingernails examine them through a loupe. I felt no sentimental attachment, only a desperate calculation of survival. He offered me $2,000. It was a fraction of their insured value, but in our current reality, it was a fortune. I took the cash, feeling the weight of the bills in my hand like a weapon. Next went the Cartier watch, then the designer handbag itself, until I was standing on the sidewalk with a plastic grocery bag containing our entire net worth. We found a basement apartment in a neighborhood where the buildings leaned against each other for support, and the sirens never seemed to stop. The landlord, a suspicious man who smelled of stale tobacco, did not ask for a credit check when I laid 6 months of rent on the counter in cash. I signed the lease as Sarah Miller, giving Beatrice the name Betty. It was the first time in 10 years I had signed a document without my hand shaking. Our new world was small, damp, and smelled faintly of boiled cabbage, but it was ours. We had no internet, and I had thrown my phone into the Chicago River the night we fled. Watching the glowing screen sink into the black water, it was our only way to stay off the grid, but it meant we were blind. I had to rely on discarded newspapers and the flicker of the television in the local bodega to see what was happening in the life I had left behind. It did not take long for Garrett to spin his web. I stood in line at the grocery store 3 days later, staring up at a small mounted TV. Garrett's face filled the screen. He looked devastated, his eyes red-rimmed, his hair artfully disheveled. The headline screamed, "Tycoon's Tragedy. Wife and mother missing in possible kidnapping plot." "My wife has been struggling," Garrett told the reporters, his voice breaking with practiced sorrow. "She has been under immense strain. We believe she may have suffered a breakdown and taken my mother, who is very ill and requires constant medical attention. Sylvia, if you are watching this, please, just bring her home. We love you." I gripped the handle of my shopping basket until my knuckles turned white. He was not just painting himself as the victim, he was setting the stage to declare me unstable. If I returned now, I would be institutionalized, and Beatrice would be buried in the system. He was effectively erasing us while the world watched and wept for him. Life in the basement was a brutal education. I, who had never cooked a meal that didn't come from a meal kit service, learned that survival has a flavor. Beatrice, no longer the silent invalid in the wheelchair, became the captain of our sinking ship. She sat at the small, scratched kitchen table, directing me as I chopped onions and soaked dried beans. "You are cutting it too thick, Sylvia," she would say, her voice firm but kind. "We need to make it stretch. My mother raised 5 of us on potato peelings and hope. We can manage this." As the days turned into weeks, she filled the silence of our exile with stories I had never heard. She told me about starting her first company in a garage, about the men who had laughed at her, and how she had bought their companies 10 years later. She taught me how to mend clothes, how to haggle at the market, and how to find dignity in the bottom of a discount bin, for the first time in my marriage. I felt truly seen. Garrett had loved me for how I looked on his arm. Beatrice loved me for the grit she was helping me find in my soul. I found work at a laundromat 4 blocks away. The owner paid me in cash, $12 an hour, to fold sheets and scrub the industrial machines. The work was hot, heavy, and endless. My manicured nails broke, my back ached, and my skin grew rough from the harsh detergents. But every evening, when I walked back to the basement with my earnings tucked in my shoe, I felt a strange, fierce pride. I was tired, but I was free. While I worked, Beatrice worked too. She did not have a computer, but she had a mind that was shaking off the rust of 5 years of sedation. She turned our small living room wall into a map of Garrett's deceit. She used sticky notes and scraps of paper to reconstruct the timeline of his theft. She spent hours at the public library, reading financial papers and tracking the stock movements of Apex Horizon. One evening, I came home to find her pacing the small kitchen, leaning heavily on her cane. "He is liquidating," she said the moment I walked in. "He is selling the subsidiaries, the logistics division, the real estate holdings. He is turning the company into cash." "Why would he do that?" I asked, dropping my bag on the floor. "The stock price will plummet." "He does not care about the stock price anymore," Beatrice said, her eyes blazing. "He is preparing to run. I saw a notice in the financial section about a merger with a holding company in Zurich. It is the mistress, Sylvia. He is going to cash out, leave the empty shell of the company for the shareholders, and disappear with her to a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty." The realization hit us both. We did not have months to plan. We had days. The next morning, the universe threw us a lifeline. I was at the pharmacy, buying aspirin for Beatrice's joint pain, when a man in a tweed coat bumped into me in the aisle. "Excuse me," he mumbled, reaching out to steady me. I looked up and froze. It was Arthur Miller. He had been my father's law partner and best friend. He had bounced me on his knee when I was a child. He was one of the few men in Chicago whose integrity was absolute. He stared at me, his eyes widening behind his wire-rimmed glasses. I was wearing a faded hoodie and no makeup, my hair pulled back in a messy bun. But he knew. "Sylvia," he whispered, "my God, the whole city is looking for you. The police said—" "The police are lying," I interrupted, my voice low and urgent. "Or they are being fed lies. Please, Mr. Miller, you knew my father. You know he raised me to be honest." He looked at my frightened eyes, then at the cheap bottle of aspirin in my hand. He looked around the store to see if anyone was watching. "Garrett said you were mentally unstable," Arthur said slowly. "He said you were dangerous. Garrett is selling Apex Horizon piece by piece and planning to flee the country," I said. "Beatrice is with me. She is not senile. She is the one who figured it out. We are hiding because if he finds us before we can prove it, we are dead." Arthur studied my face for a long, agonizing minute. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He wrote a personal cell phone number on the back. "I am going to pay for your aspirin," he said quietly, "and then I am going to walk out of here and forget I saw you. But if you have proof, Sylvia, real proof, you call me. I never liked that husband of yours. He has a handshake like a dead fish." I walked home with the aspirin and the card burning a hole in my pocket. That night, the basement did not feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like a war room. Beatrice sat at the table, smoothing out the crumpled timeline of Garrett's crimes. "We need the physical evidence," she said, tapping her finger on the table. "We need the Blue Heron ledger. I know where it is. But getting it is going to require us to step back into the lion's den." "I am ready," I said, and as I looked at my rough, red hands, I realized I finally was. The layout of the Hawthorne estate was burned into my mind, not because I had lived there, but because I had studied its blueprints with the obsession of a doctoral student. Years ago, before the dementia ruse began, Beatrice had commissioned me to draft plans for a conservatory that was never built. I knew every load-bearing wall, every ventilation shaft, and, crucially, every blind spot in the security system that Garrett had installed to keep people out, or to keep his mother in. "The attic," Beatrice had whispered to me over a dinner of canned soup. "The north corner, behind the cedar chest. There is a box marked Christmas 1998. Inside is a porcelain doll, a hideous thing with a cracked face. I hated it. So Garrett never looked at it. That is where the key and the drive are." At 2:00 in the morning, the estate loomed against the night sky like a mausoleum. It was currently listed for sale, a hollow shell waiting for a buyer. But Garrett had hired private security to patrol the grounds. I crouched in the shrubbery near the service entrance, dressed in black, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was not architecture. This was burglary. But as I watched the beam of the security guard's flashlight sweep past the rose bushes, I realized it was also justice. I waited for the guard to turn the corner toward the garage. I had exactly 90 seconds. I slipped to the side of the house, jamming a shim into the latch of the basement window. I knew the wood frame here had rotted slightly 3 years ago and had never been repaired. With a silent prayer, I pushed. The window groaned but gave way. I slid feet first into the darkness of the coal chute, landing on a pile of damp burlap sacks. Inside, the house smelled of dust and suspended time. I navigated the basement by memory. Avoiding the creaky third step of the servants' staircase, I moved like a ghost through the hallways where I used to attend lavish parties, past the furniture draped in white sheets that looked like shrouds. I reached the attic door. It was locked. I pulled a set of tension wrenches from my pocket, tools I had bought at a hardware store and practiced with for 2 days watching internet tutorials. My hands shook. Click, the lock turned. The attic was stiflingly hot. I used the low light of my penlight, shielding the beam with my hand. North corner, cedar chest. My breath hitched as I saw the stack of cardboard boxes. I tore through them, tossing aside tinsel and broken ornaments until I found it. Christmas 1998. I ripped the tape. There she was. The doll was grotesque. Her painted smile chipped and eerie in the flashlight beam. I didn't hesitate. I smashed the porcelain head against the floorboards. It shattered with a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. There, amidst the shards of skull, sat a small silver USB drive and a leather-bound pocket notebook. "Hey, who's up there?" The beam of a heavy flashlight cut through the attic window from the lawn below. The guard. He had heard the crash. Panic surged, hot and electric. I grabbed the drive and the book, shoving them into my waistband. I heard the front door burst open downstairs, heavy boots thudding on the marble foyer. "Police, come out with your hands up." He was bluffing. He was private security, not the police, but he was armed. I didn't go back to the servants' stairs. I knew the ventilation duct in the attic connected to the old laundry chute. A vertical drop that ended in a pile of linens in the mudroom. It was a risk. If the chute was blocked, I would be trapped. I scrambled to the vent, unscrewing the grate with my thumbnail until it bled. I squeezed my body into the narrow metal tunnel and let go. I slid down, the metal scraping my skin, picking up speed until, whump, I landed in a pile of dusty curtains in the mudroom. I scrambled out the back door just as the attic door upstairs was kicked open. I ran through the woods, branches whipping my face, not stopping until I reached the main road where I had hidden my bicycle. The next morning, the air in our basement apartment was thick with tension. Arthur Miller sat at our rickety kitchen table, the notebook open in front of him. He adjusted his glasses, his face growing paler with every page he turned. "This is not just embezzlement," Arthur said, his voice grave. "This is systematic fraud, money laundering, racketeering. Garrett was funneling cash from the pension fund into this Blue Heron shell company to pay off gambling debts and bribe zoning officials. Sylvia, this ledger dates back 10 years. It implicates half the city council." "Is it enough?" Beatrice asked. She was sitting in her wheelchair, her hands gripping the armrests. "It is enough to put him away for 20 years, Arthur confirmed. "But there is a problem. The sheriff, I saw his name here twice. He is on Garrett's payroll. If we take this to the local precinct, the evidence will disappear before it hits the evidence locker, and you two will die in a tragic accident." "We need the feds," I said. "The FBI." "The FBI takes time," Arthur countered. "They need to vet the source. They need warrants, and we do not have time. Look at this." He slid a newspaper across the table. My stomach dropped. It was a full-page announcement, the Beatrice Fairbanks Memorial Gala. "He is declaring you dead," I whispered. Reading the text, Garrett was petitioning the court to have Beatrice declared legally dead in absentia due to her severe medical condition and the length of her disappearance. Citing a likely drowning in the river, the gala was set for this Saturday, 3 days from now. It was a masterstroke. He would mourn her, launch a charity in her name to wash his reputation clean, and claim the inheritance all in one night. "He wants to bury me," Beatrice said, her voice low and dangerous. He wants to turn me into a saint so he can spend my money. If he gets that court order signed on Monday morning, he dissolves the trust, Arthur warned. He can move the assets offshore before the FBI even opens the file. We cannot fight him in the shadows, I said, realizing the only path forward. He owns the shadows. We have to drag him into the light. I looked at the newspaper. The gala was being held at the grand ballroom of the Palmer House. There would be press, there would be cameras, there would be the entire elite of Chicago society. We are going to the party, Beatrice said, reading my mind. It is too risky, Arthur argued. If he sees you, he will see me, Beatrice interrupted. But he will not see a cripple. She pushed her wheelchair back from the table. She locked the brakes. Then, gripping the edge of the table with white-knuckled intensity, she pushed, her legs, atrophied from months of forced sedation and inactivity, shook violently. Mother, be careful, I said, reaching out. Do not touch me, she commanded, sweat beading on her forehead. She gritted her teeth, a guttural sound of effort escaping her throat. Slowly, agonizingly, she rose. She stood there, swaying like a tree in a gale, but she was standing. I spent 5 years letting him tell me I was weak, she panted, her eyes burning with a terrifying fire. I will not roll onto that stage. Sylvia, I am going to walk into that ballroom, and I am going to look him in the eye when I destroy him. We have 3 days, I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline that banished my fear. Arthur, we need you to contact the FBI field office in Chicago, bypass the locals. Tell them we have a witness who will surrender herself and the evidence at the Palmer House on Saturday night. Tell them to bring handcuffs. Arthur looked at the two of us, the disheveled architect and the resurrected matriarch. He cracked a smile. I will make the call. You ladies better find something to wear. The hunt was over. The trap was set. And for the first time, Garrett Fairbanks was the prey. The net was tightening. I could feel it in the way the air seemed to thin around us, making every breath a conscious effort. Garrett was not a man who accepted defeat. He accepted only dominance. When his private investigators failed to find a death certificate or a body in the river, his grief turned into a predatory suspicion. He knew I was alive. He knew I was in Chicago, and he was tearing the city apart to find me. My time at the laundromat came to an abrupt end on a Tuesday afternoon. I was folding a stack of rough hospital sheets when a black sedan with tinted windows rolled slowly past the front window. It circled the block and parked. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They did not look like customers. They looked like battering rams. I watched from behind a drying machine as they approached the owner, flashing a photograph. It was an old picture of me from a society column, my hair blown out, wearing diamonds. I did not wait to see if the owner would sell me out for $100. I slipped out the back exit, sprinting down the alleyway past overflowing dumpsters, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I never went back for my last paycheck. When I returned to the basement, I found Beatrice on the floor. She had tried to walk to the bathroom without her cane and her legs had given out. Her face was gray, her breathing ragged and wet. We have to go to a hospital, I pleaded, helping her back into the wheelchair. Her skin felt like parchment paper, dry and feverishly hot. No, she wheezed, her grip on my arm surprisingly painful. No hospitals. Garrett checks the admission logs. If we go in, we never come out. You are burning up, Beatrice. I am fine, she insisted, though her voice trembled. I have to be fine. I have to live long enough to see him fall. Sylvia, after that, I do not care, but not before. Do not let me die before the gala. She was fueling her body with nothing but pure, distilled hatred. It was a terrifying thing to witness, to keep her spirit alive. I decided it was time to let Garrett know that the ghosts were not just in his head. Using the cash from the pawned watch, I went to an internet cafe 3 towns over. I did not log in. I simply printed a single image that Arthur's contact, a young hacker who owed the firm a favor, had pulled from the cloud server of the airport security firm. It was a grainy black and white still frame time-stamped at 2:45 in the afternoon on the day of our departure. It showed Garrett walking away from the alcove, his back turned to his mother, checking his watch. I put it in a plain manila envelope. No letter, no demand for money, just the photo. I mailed it to his private office at Apex Horizon. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. According to the business news Arthur brought us the next day, Garrett had suffered a public meltdown in the boardroom. He had fired his vice president of operations for disloyalty because the man had looked at him the wrong way. He had ordered a complete sweep of his office for bugs, tearing the drywall down himself in a fit of paranoia. The stock price of Apex Horizon wobbled, dropping 5% in a single afternoon. But the cracks were not just in the boardroom, they were in the bedroom too. Arthur told us that Garrett's mistress, a 24-year-old model named Tiffany, had been seen entering the offices of a high-profile divorce attorney. She wasn't divorcing anyone, which meant she was seeking protection. She had smelled the smoke. She realized that a man who would abandon his mother at an airport would not hesitate to throw a mistress under a bus. The alliance of the wicked was crumbling under the weight of its own selfishness. With our enemy distracted, I turned my attention to our armor. We could not walk into the Palmer House ballroom looking like the refugees we were. Beatrice needed to look like a queen returning from exile. I went to a thrift store and found a curtain made of heavy crimson velvet. It was dusty and smelled of mothballs, but the fabric was quality. For 3 nights, I sat under the dim bulb of our kitchen, stitching. My fingers were pricked and bleeding, but I sewed with the precision of the architect I used to be. I structured the bodice to support Beatrice's frail frame, adding rigid boning that would help her stand when her muscles failed. I turned that old curtain into a royal robe. The night before the gala, the basement was quiet. The sirens outside seemed distant, muffled by the heavy snowfall blanketing the city. I sat behind Beatrice, brushing her thin, silver hair. The rhythmic motion was soothing. We did not talk about Garrett. We did not talk about the money or the police or the danger. "Do you remember the day you married him?" Beatrice asked softly, looking at her reflection in the cracked mirror I had propped up on the table. "I remember I was afraid of tripping on my dress," I said. "I remember wanting to make you proud." "You have," she said. She reached up and covered my hand with hers. "More than he ever did. Tomorrow. Sylvia, we do not just take back the company, we take back our names. We take back the right to sleep without fear." "Freedom," I whispered. "Freedom," she echoed. We had one last task. We set up a cheap digital camera Arthur had loaned us. I pressed record. Beatrice sat facing the lens, the red light blinking in the darkness. She did not need a script. She looked into the camera and began to speak, her voice clear and steady, narrating every detail of the betrayal at the airport. She named the date. She named the time. She named the nursing home. It was our insurance policy. If Garrett had us killed before we reached the stage, this video would find its way to the district attorney. We packed nothing. We were not coming back to this basement. At 6 a.m, the sun rose over a frozen Chicago, painting the dirty snow in shades of pink and gold. I helped Beatrice into the crimson dress. It fit her perfectly, hiding the weight she had lost, giving her the silhouette of a formidable matriarch. I put on a simple black dress I had mended, fading into the background so she could shine. We left the key on the table. We walked out into the cold morning air, leaving the door unlocked. There was no need to lock up a life we had already discarded. The taxi was waiting. The storm had passed. And now, we were the lightning. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel smelled of white lilies and expensive hypocrisy. It was a scent I knew well, a cloying mixture of hothouse flowers, vintage champagne, and the sweat of 500 social climbers desperate to be seen close to tragedy. From the shadows of the service corridor, adjusting the scratchy collar of my borrowed catering uniform, I watched the vultures circle the carcass of my family name. Garrett had spared no expense for his own coronation. The tables were draped in black silk, centered with towering arrangements of white orchids that probably cost more than the average American earned in 6 months. The guests were the who's who of Chicago: senators, hedge fund managers, and the very board members who had once conspired to oust Beatrice. They clinked crystal flutes filled with Dom Perignon, whispering feigned condolences while checking their stock portfolios on their phones underneath the tablecloths. I balanced a tray of empty canapé wrappers, keeping my head down. My hair was tucked under a severe black wig, my face obscured by thick, unflattering glasses and a lack of makeup. To these people, the service staff were furniture, moving parts of the scenery that existed only to refill glasses and disappear. I moved through the crowd like a phantom, invisible in plain sight, inching closer to the audio-visual control booth at the back of the hall. On the stage, bathed in a spotlight that seemed almost divine, stood Garrett. He looked devastatingly handsome in a bespoke black tuxedo. His face a mask of noble suffering, he gripped the podium with both hands, looking out at the sea of faces with eyes that shimmered with practiced tears. My mother, Beatrice Fairbanks, was more than a business leader. Garrett's voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers, rich with emotion. She was a visionary, a philanthropist, a woman who gave everything to her city and her family. He paused, looking down as if overcome with grief. And my wife, Sylvia, my beautiful, troubled Sylvia, to lose them both, so suddenly, to the cruel twists of fate and mental illness, it is a wound that will never heal. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. I saw women dabbing dry eyes with handkerchiefs. I saw men nodding solemnly. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was painting me as a lunatic and his mother as a ghost, and he was the tragic hero left to carry the burden of their billions. But we must look forward, Garrett continued, his voice strengthening with brave resolve. We must honor their memory. That is why tonight, I am announcing the formation of the Beatrice Fairbanks Memorial Fund. This foundation will ensure that the assets my mother worked so hard to build will be used to help the elderly and the vulnerable. It was a lie so audacious it nearly made me retch. The fund was a tax haven. The papers waiting on the table beside him would transfer full control of the Fairbanks Trust, every stock, every bond, every property, into an entity solely controlled by Garrett. Once he signed, the money would be in the Cayman Islands before the first bottle of champagne was finished. I need to get into that booth, I whispered into the tiny microphone taped inside my collar. The agent is in position. Arthur Miller's voice crackled in my earpiece. Go now. We are holding the perimeter. I slipped past a distracted security guard who was too busy eyeing a waitress to notice me entering the tech room. Inside, a young FBI agent disguised as a sound technician was already there. He had silently subdued the hired projectionist, who was now bound and gagged in the corner. Is the feed ready? I asked, stripping off the catering jacket to reveal the simple black dress underneath. Queuing it up now, the agent said, his fingers flying across the mixing board. Wait for the signature. On the stage, a lawyer, one of Garrett's cronies, stepped forward with a leather portfolio. He opened it, revealing the documents that would seal our fate. He handed Garrett a gold fountain pen. This is for you. Mother, Garrett whispered into the microphone, the ultimate insult. He leaned over the table, the pen touching the paper. Now, I commanded. The agent slammed his hand down on the master breaker. Click, the ballroom plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The sudden absence of light caused immediate panic. Screams erupted from the front tables. The polite murmur turned into a cacophony of confused shouting. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Garrett's voice rang out, shrill and edged with panic. It is just a technical glitch. Get the emergency lights on. Not emergency lights, I said to the agent. The projector, full brightness. A massive beam of light cut through the darkness, hitting the giant screen behind the stage. It wasn't the memorial slideshow of Beatrice's life that Garrett had prepared. It was grainy, black and white security footage, The room fell silent. The guests mesmerized by the glowing rectangle. On the screen, the timestamp read, February 5th, 2026, 1400 hours. The location, O'Hare International Airport, Terminal 4. The image was unmistakable. There was Garrett, looking impatient, checking his watch, and there was Beatrice, looking small and confused in her wheelchair. The audio, enhanced by the FBI forensics team, boomed through the speakers, louder and clearer than any lie Garrett had told that night. Just sit here. We will be back right after check-in. The audience watched, frozen, as the on-screen Garrett turned his back on his mother. They watched him grab his wife's arm. They watched him walk away, leaving the elderly woman alone in the corner of the busy terminal. They watched him check his phone, not looking back once. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It wasn't a gasp of sympathy. It was the sound of 500 people realizing they had been applauding a monster. "Turn it off!" Garrett screamed, his composure shattering. He was flailing in the dark, trying to cover the projector beam with his body, but he was too small against the massive image of his own sin. "Cut the power! Somebody cut the power!" "Lights," I ordered. The house lights flooded back on. Blindingly bright, the sudden illumination exposed Garrett standing center stage, his hands raised, his face twisted in a rictus of terror. He looked like a cockroach caught in a kitchen light. But no one was looking at him. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the double doors at the main entrance. The doors swung open with a heavy ceremonial thud. Beatrice Fairbanks stood there. She was not in a wheelchair. She was not a confused old woman in a hospital gown. She was standing upright, supported by a polished ebony cane, but supporting her own weight. She was wearing the crimson velvet gown I had sewn with bloodied fingers in a basement. The fabric caught the light, glowing like embers, like the robes of a vengeful queen. Her silver hair was swept back, revealing a face that was gaunt but fierce, her eyes locking onto her son with the force of a sniper rifle. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I stepped out from the wings of the stage, pulling the black wig from my head and letting my own hair fall around my shoulders. I walked to the center of the room and took my place beside Beatrice. I stood not as her daughter-in-law, not as a victim, but as her guard, her witness, her executioner. Garrett stared at us, the gold pen slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the stage floor. "Mother?" he choked out, the word sounding like a curse. "Sylvia? But you are dead." Beatrice took a step forward, the tap of her cane echoing against the marble floor. She raised her head, addressing the room, her voice projecting without a microphone, clear and cold as winter air. "Reports of my death," she declared, her gaze drilling into Garrett, "were greatly exaggerated by the man standing on that stage." The trap had snapped shut, the prey was caught, and the feast of the hypocrites was over. "It is a fake! It is a deep fake!" Garrett screamed, his voice cracking as it ricocheted off the gilded ceiling. He pointed a trembling finger at the frozen image on the screen, sweat streaming down his temples, ruining his stage makeup. "Do you people not read the news? Artificial intelligence can create anything now. This is a setup. My mother is sick. She has advanced dementia. She does not know where she is right now. This woman standing here is an imposter, or she is being manipulated by my wife." He looked around the room, desperate for an ally, for a nod of agreement, for anything other than the wall of disgusted silence that greeted him. He lunged toward the microphone, his eyes wild. "Sylvia has been unstable for years. She kidnapped my mother. She forced her to wear that dress. This is elder abuse." "Give me the microphone, Garrett," Beatrice said. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her voice cut through his hysteria like a diamond cutter through glass. She walked up the stairs to the stage, the rhythmic thud, click of her cane on the wood steps amplifying the tension. Garrett shrank back as she approached, terrified not of her physical strength, but of the sheer, crushing weight of her authority. She reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He let it go as if it were burning hot. Beatrice turned to face the crowd. She looked at the bankers who had written her off. She looked at the socialites who had whispered about her decline. Then, she looked at her son. "I may be old, son," she said, her voice booming through the speakers, steady and resonant. "But I am not blind, and unlike you, I am not a liar." Garrett opened his mouth to interrupt, but I stepped forward, pulling a remote control from the pocket of my dress. "You want to talk about facts, Garrett?" I asked, my voice calm, fueled by the cold fire of justice. "Let us talk about facts. You claim you left the airport to get help? You claim you were distraught?" I pressed the button. The image on the screen changed. It was a digital scan of a bank transfer, magnified so every zero was visible to the back of the room. "This is a transaction record from the Fairbanks Family Trust," I narrated, pointing to the screen. "Time-stamped at 3:15 in the afternoon on February 5th. That is exactly 20 minutes after you left Beatrice at the terminal, while she was sitting alone in a wheelchair, wondering if you were coming back. You were on your phone transferring $500,000 from her personal medical savings account into your private holding company." The crowd gasped. Financial infidelity was a language this room understood perfectly. "You stole from her before you even boarded the plane," I continued. Pressing the button again, a new document appeared. "And here's the request you sent to the nursing home, categorizing her as an indigent ward of the state to avoid paying the monthly fees. You have billions, Garrett, but you were too cheap to pay for a private room for the mother you were throwing away." "That is privileged information," Garrett shrieked, looking at his lawyer, who was currently backing away from the stage, trying to disappear into the curtains. "You stole my passwords. That is illegal. You are a criminal, Sylvia." "I am not the criminal here," I said, stepping closer to him until I could smell the fear radiating off him. "And I am not the only one who knows it. But the money is the least of your problems. Garrett, the real problem is that you are bad at business." I signaled to the tech booth. The screen went black, then displayed a single, scanned legal document. It was dated February 4th, the day before our flight. "You thought you were the CEO," I said, pitching my voice so it carried to every corner of the room. "You thought that by declaring Beatrice incompetent, you would trigger the emergency clause and take full control of the voting shares. But you forgot one thing. A mother always knows when her child has gone bad." I turned to the audience. "On the morning before we left for the airport, Beatrice Fairbanks invoked Article 7 of the company bylaws. She signed a temporary transfer of authority. She placed 100% of her voting shares, which constitute 51% of the company, into a blind trust." Garrett went pale. He looked like he had been shot. "What? No, that is impossible. I checked the logs." "You checked the digital logs," I corrected him. "She signed the physical papers. And do you know who she named as the temporary trustee?" I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "Me," I said. The word hung in the air. Garrett staggered back, clutching the podium for support. "For the last 2 weeks," I said, enjoying the look of absolute horror on his face. "Every executive order you signed, every asset you sold, and every employee you fired was unauthorized. You have been impersonating the CEO. You have been committing corporate fraud on a massive scale. You do not own this company. Garrett, you do not even own the suit you are wearing. It belongs to the trust. It belongs to me." "No!" Garrett screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He spun around, looking for an escape route. "She is lying. It is a conspiracy. Tiffany, tell them. Tell them Sylvia planned this." He pointed a shaking finger into the crowd, searching for his mistress. Tiffany, a tall blonde woman wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, stood up at table 4, but she was not looking at Garrett with love. She was looking at the FBI agents who were quietly securing the exits. "I am not going to jail for you, Garrett," she shouted, her voice shrill with panic. She raised her hands in surrender. "He made me do it. He forced me to forge the doctor's signature on the competency report. I have the texts. He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him." The final thread of Garrett's defense snapped. "Arthur, now," I said into my collar. From the back of the room, Arthur Miller stepped forward, flanked by 6 federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI. They moved with swift, professional efficiency, swarming the stage. Garrett tried to run. He actually tried to scramble over the floral arrangements at the edge of the stage, knocking over a vase of orchids in a crash of glass and water. 2 agents grabbed him before his feet even touched the floor. They spun him around, slamming him face first against the podium he had just used to preach his lies. Click. Click. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was louder than any applause Garrett had ever received. "Garrett Fairbanks," an agent announced, reading from a card. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." Garrett struggled, his face pressed against the wood, spittle flying from his mouth. "You are a gold digger. Sylvia, you planned this whole thing. You just want the money. You are nothing. I made you." He twisted his neck to look at the crowd, pleading with his eyes, but the faces looking back at him were cold. These were people who tolerated greed, but they did not tolerate failure, and they certainly did not tolerate public humiliation. He was radioactive. The agents hauled him upright. His tuxedo was wet from the spilled water, his hair matted to his forehead. He looked small. He looked pathetic. They began to drag him off the stage. As they passed Beatrice, she raised her cane. "Stop," she commanded. The agents paused. Even the FBI obeyed Beatrice Fairbanks at that moment. She stepped forward, looking down at the son she had raised, the boy she had protected, the man who had tried to erase her. Her face was not angry. It was filled with a profound, crushing sadness. "I gave you everything, Garrett," she said softly. "I gave you my name. I gave you my company. I gave you my trust." Garrett stared at her, breathing hard, his eyes darting back and forth. "I taught you how to read a balance sheet," Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "I taught you how to negotiate a deal. I taught you how to make money." She shook her head slowly. "But I am sorry. My son, it seems I forgot to teach you how to be a human being." "Mother, please," Garrett whimpered, the reality finally piercing his narcissism. "Don't let them take me." Beatrice looked at him for 1 second longer, then turned her back. "Get him out of my sight," she said to the agents. "No, Mother, Sylvia." Garrett's screams echoed through the ballroom as they dragged him down the stairs and up the center aisle. "I am innocent. This is a mistake. I am the victim here." The double doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his wails. The ballroom was silent. The floor was covered in broken glass and spilled water. The image of the airport was still frozen on the screen above us. I stood next to Beatrice, my hand finding hers. Her grip was weak now, the adrenaline fading, but she was still standing. We were the only 2 things left standing in the wreckage of the Fairbanks dynasty. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like oppression. It felt like victory. 3 months had passed since the night the lights went out at the Palmer House, but the aftershocks were still rattling the foundations of Chicago's high society. The newspapers could not get enough of the story. Garrett Fairbanks, the man who had once graced the cover of Forbes as a visionary, was now the face of every tabloid in the country. He was currently residing in a 6x8 cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, awaiting a trial where federal prosecutors were seeking a sentence of 20 years. His appeals for bail had been denied 3 times. The man who had been terrified of losing his status had achieved a level of infamy that no amount of money could scrub away. For me, the courtroom drama was just background noise. My battles were fought and won in quieter rooms. My divorce was finalized in record time. Aided by the mountain of evidence regarding Garrett's financial infidelity, I did not ask for alimony. I did not ask for a share of his personal assets. which were currently frozen by the government anyway. I walked away with my name, my freedom, and the absolute legal guardianship of the woman he had tried to discard. Beatrice, true to her word, did not keep the company. "It is poisoned fruit, Sylvia," she told me one afternoon as we sat with the lawyers. "Garrett built the modern apex horizon on lies and theft. I will not let that legacy stand." She initiated a hostile sale of the entire conglomerate. She stripped it down, sold off the assets to ethical competitors, and took the proceeds, hundreds of millions of dollars, to establish a genuine charitable trust. This time, it was not a tax haven. It was a foundation dedicated to legal defense for the elderly and housing for the displaced. She burned his empire to the ground and used the ash to fertilize the soil for something good. We did not return to the penthouse on the Gold Coast. The air there was too thin, and the memories were too cold. Instead, I bought a house in Evanston, a suburb just north of the city. It was an old Victorian home with a wraparound porch, squeaky floorboards, and a wild, unruly garden that smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. It was a house that breathed. It was imperfect, and it was perfect. I reopened my architecture practice, converting the sunroom into a studio. I was not designing skyscrapers or luxury condos anymore. I was working on a project close to my heart, a series of small, accessible cottage communities for elderly people who had no family. I drew plans for ramps that looked like garden paths and communal kitchens that encouraged connection. I was building the kind of world I wanted Beatrice to live in. Beatrice herself was fading. The adrenaline that had sustained her through our war had ebbed away, leaving behind the reality of her 72 years. She tired easily now. Her hands shook more than they used to, and sometimes she would forget where she put her glasses. But this was not the chemical fog of Garrett's drugs. It was the natural, gentle slowing down of a life well lived. She was no longer a prisoner in her own body. She slept when she was tired. She ate when she was hungry, and she laughed often. One late afternoon in October, we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the tree line. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Beatrice was wrapped in a hand-knit blanket, a cup of chamomile tea trembling slightly in her hands. "Sylvia," she said, her voice soft and raspy. I looked up from my sketchbook. "Yes, Mother?" She turned her gaze to me. Her gray eyes were clear, reflecting the orange light of the sunset. "You could have walked away, at the airport. You could have boarded that plane and claimed ignorance. You could be in Paris right now, young and rich and free of burdens." She paused, taking a sip of tea. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Do you regret running away with a dying old woman and losing your place in the world?" I closed my sketchbook. I looked at the garden, where the chrysanthemums were blooming in defiant bursts of purple and gold. I looked at the woman who had become my mother, my partner, and my hero. I thought about the emptiness of the penthouse, the cold perfection of my marriage to Garrett, and the hollow doll I used to be. I did not lose my place in the world. "Beatrice," I said, reaching out to take her hand. It was warm and dry. "And I did not run away," I smiled, feeling a peace so deep it felt like an anchor holding me safe in a harbor. I found my way home. Beatrice squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Later, as the twilight deepened into purple, I helped her into her wheelchair for our evening walk. We moved slowly down the tree-lined street. The maples and oaks were shedding their leaves, creating a carpet of crimson and gold on the sidewalk. A gust of wind shook the branches above us, sending a shower of yellow leaves drifting down around us. They swirled in the air, catching the light of the street lamps, fluttering down to the pavement like thousands of gold coins. We rolled over them, crushing them into dust. They were beautiful, and they were worthless. We had left the real gold coins behind in a bank account in the Caymans, and we had never been richer. I pushed the chair forward, Listening to the rhythm of the wheels and the rustle of the leaves, we were just two women on a quiet street in America, invisible to the world, but entirely visible to each other. The best revenge is not to harm the enemy, but to live a brilliant life that he can never touch. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please leave a comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to read your thoughts and connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Sweet Rose Drama channel, like the video, and hit the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.